Alright, and welcome to the non-fiction book report for the Less You Know, the Better You Sleep, Russia's Road to Terror and Dictatorship under Yeltsin and Putin by David Sater, or Sater. Basically, the idea behind my non-fiction book reports is for me to offer my opinion on the non-fiction book that I have read. I do the same thing for the fiction books, but on a different channel. In some cases, I do give more of a more detailed analysis or more detailed opinion because I have a background or qualifications to do so. And this is one of those cases. Specifically, the reason is because I did live through many of the events that the author described in the books while I was doing in Russia, and at the same time I also had enough access to the Russian media and to be able to actually interact with people who were in Russia or who had contacts with Russians who were living in Russia at the time, to be able to really understand what was going on in the same period. So therefore, this kind of gives me a better view of the information that has been presented. So let's go on to the book, and I usually begin with the author because the importance for the author to the book here is extremely high. Specifically, depending who the author is, it raises the amount of scrutiny that I will do on the book when I'm reading through it and I'm giving my opinion on it, because depending on the author's qualifications, the author will have a better background, and therefore I will be providing a more, will be, I guess, looking at more critically at the author's work rather than the person who has lower qualifications. Then who has a lower qualifications, then I'm not looking at with such a scrutiny at their book, because it's already clear that the author does not have as much of qualifications, and therefore his or her book is no longer could be, I guess, considered to be as strong of a source for any research or any or just general knowledge as, let's say, a person who's pretty much a specialist in the field. So to look at the author himself, David Sater is a journalist that reported on Soviet Union, then now he's reporting on Russia. He's no longer living in Russia, but he did live in Soviet Union and Russia for a long time. He describes enough of episodes where he, actually I think there's one specific very much episode that he described in the book where he pretty much mentions that he was taken in by the whole situation there. I think he was talking about the vouchers and the idea that how he didn't understand the whole situation with vouchers either, like every other citizen in Russia who were totally confused by the whole idea of what those vouchers were and what do you do with them. So he's no longer in Russia because, as he's saying, he got kicked out for his criticism of the regime. He was very critical of Soviet Union, he was critical of Russia and Yeltsin and Putin, so therefore he's pretty much saying that eventually they kicked me out. The Russian security forces maintained that not security forces, security agencies maintained that he just did not renew his visa properly. There was irregularities in his application, and therefore that's the reason his visa was denied. So, well, doesn't really matter. He's mostly writing about the period that he witnessed himself while living in Russia, and so that gives him pretty good qualifications to talk about this, and given his coverage of the period and the overall living through it, I will say that it's very good qualifications. Therefore, that's what I'm saying, that I'm placing a lot of scrutiny on the facts that are being presented in the book, especially also because I lived through a lot of them. Like literally, when I was reading the book, I was flipping through the pages, reading each one. I'm like, yeah, I remember this happened, because I literally lived through the events. So let's talk about the book itself. Now, the main point need to be understood is that the core of the book revolves around author's idea that the 1999 apartment bombings that occurred in Moscow and some other Russian cities were orchestrated by the Russian government. This is what the author believes. He presents a case for that in the first chapter of his book. He presents all the different information that he gathered and the other very circumstantial, what he believes is pretty much not circumstantial, pretty much direct evidence of the government involvement, and he summarizes there and presents. He has another book that deals specifically only with that I know that from his publication history. So from looking from all of this, you gotta understand that the rest of the book is colored in the same theme. He goes in and says this is what happened, and then he's like, okay, now through that prism, let's look at the whole history of Russia. So for that reason, all the presentation, like such as tragedies such as Beslan and Nordost, is done the same way. He's pretty much showing them to be, somewhere in such a way it's being done by or planned out by the Russian government and being carried out in one way or another by the Russian government. And his reasons are given just as the idea that you distract people from events that are happening, or you try to consolidate some kind of, or get some kind of gains in power, or along those lines. He does present these facts, and he does a very good job of presenting the facts that what he believes exactly happened. Here's his evidence of what exactly was achieved using this event by the government. So, example for one of the facts that he presents for the Beslan tragedy is that he references the fact that the roadblocks that existed during that time that would have blocked the terrorists' ability to move into Beslan were removed during that day. And so the terrorists had no issues moving across from Chechnya and getting into Beslan. So that's one of the facts. There's other ones for he talks about the Nordas who supplied the weapons, so the fact that people seems to have seen people who were associated with Russian security agencies. Among all the fact that some of the terrorists seems to have connections with some these people security agencies. So he presents this kind of facts. As I said, all it is pretty much presented this way. The whole book is presented that way to kind of create this whole idea, though that expressed pretty much in the title of the book, that this is a dictatorship that is creating different events to keep itself in power. And of course he references events in Ukraine, but because they were more recent, he doesn't go that much into them, but he does reference them and, as another example of this many machinations by the Russian government. Now, once you understand that prism that the author is using to present the information, it's possible to read the book and say, okay, I understand where you're coming from, but overall you can just read for the actual history of events that were happening in Russia at the time. It's a very well presented, it's easy to read. Again, once you understand the bias of that, you can say, yeah, I understand what you're going here, but overall, okay, so this is what I've heard, this is who was came to which positions in the government, who in which positions. He presents all that very, very well. He presents detailed explanations for some things, such as the 98 crisis. He explains, okay, this is the reason why it occurred, or this is how, or he will present the ideas such as, here's how the state companies were being privatized, and this is how the events occurred, and this is how people secured them for a very small price. So this is kind of a very good review. In that way, it's very well done. What I did not like 100% of the way was that not all references were given. In other words, sometimes I'm reading the book and I'm like, oh, this is an interesting fact. I wonder where he's getting that. Oh, there is no footnote for that. He has a lot of footnotes. He does have a lot of references. He references a lot of facts, but there's sometimes some things that are not referenced. So I'm not exactly sure if it's because it was author's own research and so he's putting it out, so therefore he's not going to be referencing himself. Or is it that his deductions? What is it exactly? Sometimes just that lack of some of the references that you can look into see where is he getting this is kind of makes it a bit of a less of a solid book. But again, overall the rest of the book is pretty well done. Again, also you have to take into consideration the prism that the author is using, the idea that the Russian government is behind a lot of the terrorist attacks and a lot of certain events that occurred through the modern history. Now, and of course by Russian government I mean the current administration. That's what the author is presenting. So overall, in conclusion, I would say this is a very good book to read, even if you do not agree with the author's point of view. For simple reason is that the author does a very good job of explaining the arguments of the opposition side, that the arguments that the opposition gives for its views and of how the things unfolded, whether it's those bombings, whether it's Islam, whether it's Nordost, whether it's other things that occurred during 90s and 2000s and 2010s. So all those things, all those arguments, all those factors that are used to kind of demonize the regime, or to oppose the regime, are all very well presented. So if you want to learn about those facts and where those things are coming from, this is a great book to do so. Overall, again, I will say that does present the history of the 1990s and 2000s pretty well also. So why not? This is pretty interesting in that way. And the author pretty much clearly says that it's not like he is saying that this person was a good person versus this person is really bad, because he pretty much points out that a lot of the people who even later on oppose the government or oppose the current authority, the current administration in Russia, also themselves were not exactly squeaky clean, and they earned their money or achieved their positions also through corrupt means. Now, overall, the conclusions that the book presents, I do not believe they should be taken they can be believed to be 100% to be the truth. Partially because some of the references are missing in terms of wasn't able to find them. Maybe it's just me, but also you can't just take one source and believe it 100%. You gotta look and discover the other views of these events, other presentations of these events, what people, what other ways people have interpreted these events. Get this more overall idea of the event, and then decide exactly what do you believe in terms of what happened, what was going on. This would be the proper approach. And so the book should be one of the several books that you read to as the most as to form your idea about the events that occurred. Now, after this, I'm going to present my views on what exactly I believe about the events, or exactly where I see where exactly the author is coming from, or somewhere he could be deriving some of his conclusions, and my criticism of these conclusions, because again, I lived through some of these events, and then later on I also was able to pretty much be close to them thanks to the fact that the Russian news sources I was still exposed to even after I moved out of Russia. Now, you got to understand the whole argument that the apartment bombs were something carried out by the Russian securities agencies. The popularity of that argument kind of rests on the idea of what happened during the 1990s in Russia. Pretty much in the 1990s, the bottom fell off for the common Russians. The structure that they lived in, the Soviet Union structure, was completely destroyed. The transition approach was taken in that was used was pretty much of a sledgehammer approach. People broke things, and then it's like, okay, now you're gonna put something new in place, but we have no idea how to do it. And so, as a result, except the few people who managed to take advantage of the situation, those are the people who were called the new Russians at one point. Now they're called the oligarchs. They took advantage of it, but most people pretty much got screwed. For them, the bottom fell out, and these new ideas were begun to be introduced, except people had no education, nothing, or life experience to back it up to understand exactly what are you actually trying to introduce to them. And this is something that in kind of harder to understand for people who are living in the Western world. Is the idea is that, well, how hard could it be to them? But because while we live in the Western world, we do experience all this, the capitalist society as it is right now. So we can understand things such as stock market. We understand what's a bonds, what's how the banks the banks operate overall. That there are different investments that possible. You can buy different investments such as things like mutual funds or something like that. All this that we understand, that we have information that we can look up right now. Things were being introduced into Russia and people had no idea what they were. One of my professors at the University for Finance told me that back in the day he used to teach in specific during that period. You had actually during the late 1980s, he had different people from Soviet Union these were people who had administrative positions in the government who were coming over to the Western universities to learn about capital and how it functioned, because nobody had any clear idea. Well, I guess some people had to a certain extent, but it wasn't that general understanding. So when people during the 1990s were being given all this, the vouchers or the shares of the companies they were working for, they had no idea what they were. They had no idea what to do with them. Nobody really can explain to them. So another author points out those vouchers were being sold off by the people for literally nothing because they had no idea what's the value of this thing is. You gave me this and nobody explains to me what am I supposed to do with this? Oh, somebody offers me some money for it. I guess I'll give it to them because they gave me money for it. That was it. And as the author points out, that was how a lot of modern oligarchs managed to seize large state companies, to seize a lot of property for themselves from the government because they managed to capitalize on this. But to everybody else, to the regular Russian citizens, this was all arcane stuff happening. To them, they couldn't understand it. They just looked to them as pretty much a corruption type of thing or some kind of machinations, not an honest way of doing things, because they had no idea what was being happened. Some guy, somehow secures that apparently from every dollar certain company makes, he gets 2 cents. How's that possible? Or something like that. To them it was impossible to understand that this was how investment works, and that the person holds an interest in the company and he's getting paid out from the profits of the company. But that idea that you can have partial interest in the company, partial investment, none of that existed in the people's minds because they never were exposed to it before. It was a crash course going on there, and most people were failing. So this was a sentiment, I remember they're living there, and the joke being that, oh yeah, by the way, you should screw over the government because the government is screwing you over. Because that's how it appeared to be. The government was screwing every citizen over, so it was okay to try to, cheat on the government because, they'll screw you over even more than you can ever get back at them. So when the apartment bombings happened and people say, well, this is government, doing that, the idea was not exactly something, oh my God, are you kidding me? This is kind of conspiracy, crazy fear. No. To a lot of people, it was just like, oh yeah, common sense, yeah, sure. We've been being screwed over by the government, all this time. So of course, this is another one of them, one of those things happening. They're screwing us over. And this is happening right on the coattails of the 1998 financial crisis that occurred in Russia, which nobody understood in the general Russian population exactly what happened. I literally had to explain to my parents who were living at the time. I was a kid at the time, so I completely never understood what was going on there, except that the only thing that was happening is that the dollar was going high and people's savings were just evaporating because the purchasing power was completely decreasing. But to everybody of lay people, it looked like something that the government was screwing them over because the oligarchs were not being affected by the same way as the common Russian. This used to be the oligarchs were actually running this financial crisis and getting richer still. All their brothering pretty well. So how come they were doing it and nobody else could? So to them, to everybody, this was weird, and literally they thought that government was just screwing everybody over again. Right? Like I said, I had to explain it after the fact, after my family already moved out of Russia, to my parents, oh, by the way, you know why this happened? This is the reason why it happened. And they're like, oh, okay. They literally had no idea. Because even if somebody would have tried to explain, I don't know if people tried to explain on the news of what exactly was happening, nobody would have understood it. Because again, the whole dynamic was not present. Nobody had enough knowledge or background knowledge to understand how this all works. How the currency markets works, how the government issued securities and how that relates to interest rates and to FX rates and all that stuff. This is there's a whole usually course in university for that, explaining that the international system of payments and purchasing power parities and all those things that are happening. How do you expect a lay person even to understand it, especially a lay person who had no background in anything capitalism before? So, like I said, the apartment bombs conspiracy was pretty much, conspiracy theory, once it was presented, pretty much accepted by a lot of people because, to them, it really looked like just more of the same situation that was occurring. And as the other said, he was also being always taken in by some type of ideas like this before, or the hysteria that was happening in different periods in Russian history, that he was living in because he was witnessing it there and kind of being influenced by the overall opinion. So that's why I believe that's why he feels so strongly about them. Now he has presented his evidence for it, but like I said, you have to verify that evidence. You just can't take it at face value because, given the feelings at the moment, the theory pretty much held just because everybody just, Alex said, thought that this is just another one of those things that were just happening to us. By us, I mean the common people. Now, the author's presentation of tragedies of Nordost and Beslan is pretty much done not only for the facts how terrorists managed to get in, or how they got acquired weapons, or who kind of aided them, who different facts about different calls or something like that were occurring, some kind of communications that might have been occurring. I think what biggest criticism, of course, is how the things were handled. He talks about the ideas that hostages, and the terrorists at the Nordost were pretty much all poisoned by the gas, and that nobody tried to interrogate the terrorists. They just be trapped right there while they were incapacitated while they were pretty much be incapacitated by the gas. Sorry. So he's talking that this kind of seems weird, and then he talks about the best of the use of tanks, the use of flamethrowers again, saying that this is kind of weird when you firing the building that's holding hostages using this kind of weapons. His frame of reference, however, is against the way this kind of operations would have been conducted in the West. Now, here's the issue though. You can't say that the situation was handled incorrectly from the perspective by comparing to the West, the way the special forces in Russia operate to the way the special forces in the West operate. They operate on two different playbooks, right? The only way you can say that there was abnormalities in the way the situation was handled is if you actually know the Russian special forces playbook and say, oh well, they kind of operated not by these rules as they usually operate. This is now, that is strange. This is how usually things are looked over whenever something happens in the West, right? Whenever there's a police shooting or something like that, references immediately. So what's the procedure for police to follow? Was the person violating the procedure? And so this is kind of approach. Now that does not mean that if your procedures are crap, that this it still kind of justifies the handling. All it means that the procedures were followed, so there was no abnormalities. they were quite clearly crappy procedures because of the result of what happened in the end. The casualties among the hostages, so that quite clearly shows that the procedures were not that great if they were following those procedures, or if there were procedures. You see, another thing that should be kept in mind is that certain amount of incompetence that would have been present. Remember, during the 1990s, Russia suffered a certain drain of talent because people with talent, with dedication, seeing no future for themselves in Russia left. So you had whoever remained behind, so were the ones that have had to be running things, and this of course led to a certain amount of incompetence. So I'm not saying that it was incompetence there, or which of this, or whether it was specifically the violation of procedures, or whether it was just basically that the fact that these Russian special forces procedures just are not designed in any way to really assure the safety of the hostages. In that, I have no idea. I have not seen those procedures. Can't really say. Don't have enough information there to say it. But I'm saying from my experience, all this needs to be taken into consideration, and all these points need to be researched before coming up with an idea, because in terms of the number of how much incompetence was there during the 1990s in Russia was pretty high. So while the best line and no doubts happened during the 2000s, it's not like suddenly everybody became extremely competent. Because, well, think about it, the special forces that were operating in Beslan were they already had quite a good experience fighting terrorists. They were not fighting, the usual. This was not the usual fighting of a terrorist approach, right? This time you had a large amount of hostages. Totally different type of building that quite clearly the author explains that there was practices that the special forces were practicing storming. So a similar type of building not far away. So kind of begins to question how much did they actually understand of how to handle that kind of situation. So it's quite possible where procedures for this kind of situation did not exist, and they were going on with what was the usual approach, which was handling just a normal group of terrorists without thinking of how to handle the situation when there are hostages there. I'm not exactly sure, but the picture is not there 100% complete. So while the author presents a very good, interesting facts and arguments, I'm not 100% ready to go ahead and just accept them as is. And I believe that more research, if you want to actually form up a view on this event, you need to do more research than just what the author presented. Now, the author also talks a lot about the corruption in Russia. He partially blames the Soviet Union for saying that the morals were not there, and so therefore the whole idea of corruption continue on. Well, it's kind of not exactly the same, because the corruption level in Russia that happened after the breakdown of the Soviet Union was way higher than it was there during the Soviet Union. So the morals and ethics did exist in the Soviet Union, and the degradation of them occurred because of the situation that type of people found themselves in. They found themselves in a situation where the risk of corrupt acts went way down because of lack of any enforcement, but the rewards went up. People found themselves in positions where their salaries were not being paid, or were extremely small, so to support themselves, support their families, they had no choice but to rely on the corrupt practices, and therefore they were in that situation. So if you kind of make it so that the people do not need to rely on corrupt practices to, at the same time, to support themselves, support their families, so in other words, you need to balance out the whole risk-reward situation, so that the risk now is too high versus the reward, so for people not to consider the corruption, not to consider performing different acts that are pretty much a corruption, that are corrupt, not taking bribes, only doing that stuff, right? For that, the risk has to be extremely high and the reward has to be low in comparison to that risk. Because during the 1990s that was not the case, this was extremely low, the reward was extremely high, it occurred. Now, that of course requires a higher standard of living, so in order for corruption to decrease, you need a higher standard of living for people, and of course you also need a certain enforcement mechanism that should exist to prevent or detect corruption. So it's a two-way approach, as but the others kind of wants the Russians to become moral overall. It's kind of a grow that kind of a society. I don't know how you're gonna do that if you don't have a backing that will make them interested in doing so. In other words, if as long as you have your risk and reward system not working properly there, no matter how much of a normal education exists there, it's not gonna help. Think of it this way: a person who's sitting on a math exam and who knows how to solve a math problem is not gonna cheat on the exam, because that person knows how to solve a math problem. He doesn't need to cheat. People who cheat are the ones who have no choice, right? Who do not know how to solve a problem, or just found out that the exam is extremely unfair to them. This was the reason you had the corruption in Russia, because people found themselves in situations that were extremely unfair to them, and the only way out was through corruption, through acts of corruption. Once they begin to level, increase their lifestyle, to them it's going to become like, well, I don't need to do this as much anymore to secure a good lifestyle, because I already have one. Number two, as I said, they still need the enforcement mechanism, because if people see the fact that they can get away with things, they can continue on doing them. Anyway, so I'm kind of running in a loop now, so let's move on to the next thing. And it's the other's idea that, why Putin is talking about other talks about why Putin stays in power, how his administration stays in power, and the idea that you cannot push that administration out through the normal means. Through the normal democratic type of means, because the whole system is too much under control of the current administration, and therefore he believes that the only way to do it is through type of a coup d'etat, through demonstrations, that kind of stuff. And it's not exactly something that I believe will happen as much, partially because, again, people are in a situation where to them Putin seems to be delivering things, right? Other points out that to people, the Russians looked at the 90s era and say, well, there we tried the whole democracy thing as the West wanted, and it was a whole mess. Now we have more authoritarian regime, but at least it's not a mess like we had in the 1990s. So basically, this is what keeps the power base for Putin in, because people are generally better off than they were in the 1990s, and say, we'll take this over that approach. Number two, the idea that there's going to be some kind of popular uprising that can overthrow this is again overestimated, because people don't look towards events in Ukraine right now. The Russians are going to look towards Ukraine and say, well, those guys, overthrew their administration at the time. Now they have a new government and it's still a mess. That's pretty much kind of a idea that the Russians have, is that no matter who's going to be in the government, they're going to be corrupt. They're going to steal, and that's going to happen. To them, it's not as much the idea that the person steals, it's the idea that one person also delivers at the same time for the rest of the country. So they're pretty much fine with the idea that, yeah, you can steal, you can be corrupt, but as long as you still, increase our lifestyle, improve our lifestyle. And so far with Putin, people had that happening. So, and they don't really see anybody else in opposition kind of presenting them anything better. They don't believe that there could be a better way, because to them it's like, well, the opposition takes over, either we go to the whole 1990s period again and go in the whole chaotic situation, and we're going to get completely screwed, or the new guys are going to be just the same, and so what's the point of changing? It's kind of like that kind of a opinion pretty much exists. It's common, and from what the impression that I've been given by when I talk to people who either in Russia or who have people who know people who live in Russia themselves, or who just recently came from Russia. So to them, to those people, when you talk about, that's basically their opinions. Like, yeah, we now don't want to, there's no point of changing one thing for the, changing one administration for another, which is going to be pretty much the same, except we might go through the whole 1990s era again, and we don't want that happening. Alright, so that would be all my views on the whole few topics that are presented by this author, and thank you for watching and for listening.